The Keth patrol cruiser slid through the dark like a blade. It was long, black, and built for one thing, making smaller ships afraid. Its hull was scarred from 100 engagements across a dozen star systems. Its crew had boarded freighters, burned stations, and left wreckage drifting in the cold for other ships to find as a warning. They were good at what they did. They had never once been surprised. Commander Drawl sat in his high chair at the center of the bridge and watched the contact appear on the sensor screen. A single ship, slow, running on low power. The registry came back almost immediately. ISV Relentless Mercy, civilian class, registered out of the Terran Outer Freight Consortium. Cargo listed as industrial ore. Crew of 11. Drawl leaned back and folded his upper arms across his chest. 11 crew members on a cargo ship the size of a city block. He had seen this before. Human merchants were always pushing their luck, running lean crews to save money, flying old ships to save more. They crossed Keth space because the route was shorter, and they told themselves the risk was worth it. Today, one of them would learn that it was not. "Hail them," Drawl said. His communications officer opened the channel. There was a pause of several seconds, the kind of pause that told Drawl the humans on the other end were nervous, maybe talking among themselves, maybe checking their options. Then the screen lit up, and a face appeared. She was not what he expected. She was a woman of middle age, with short gray hair and dark, steady eyes. She wore a plain gray jacket with no rank markings, no insignia, nothing that told him who she was. She looked at him the way someone looks at a weather report, interested in the information, not afraid of it. "This is Commander Sarah Voss, of the Relentless Mercy," she said. Her voice was calm, not the kind of calm that people perform when they are scared, the real kind. "Go ahead." Drawl introduced himself and his vessel. He stated, in the formal language of Keth interdiction law, that the Relentless Mercy was operating in contested freight space and was subject to inspection and levy. He told her that if she cooperated, she would be allowed to proceed. He told her that the cargo would be offloaded. He told her that her crew would not be harmed. He had given this speech many times. Usually there was pleading, sometimes there were tears. Once, a human captain had tried to negotiate, as though there were terms to be discussed. Drawl had found that almost funny. Commander Voss listened to all of it without changing her expression. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You have 60 seconds to reverse course," she said. That was all. No explanation, no counteroffer, no fear in her voice. Drawl stared at the screen. He was not sure he had heard her correctly. He ran the translation through his head again. Yes, she had told him, commanding a Keth warship of the 4th class, to turn around. She had given him 60 seconds to do it. Behind him, his weapons officer let out a short sound that was the Keth equivalent of a laugh. Someone else on the bridge muttered something low. Drawl felt the first flicker of something he did not immediately recognize. Not anger, not offense, something stranger. A slight uncomfortable feeling, like the air pressure had changed. He pushed it away. "Lock targeting solutions on their drive section," he said. "And their communications array. I want them quiet and still." "Locked," the weapons officer confirmed. On the screen, Voss had not moved. She was not looking at her own controls. She was not talking to her crew. She was watching him, and the expression on her face was the same as it had been at the start. Level, patient, waiting. Drawl watched the timer on his panel count. 30 seconds. The Relentless Mercy had not changed course. It had not powered up its drive, or tried to run. It was just sitting there in the dark, holding its position, as if it had nowhere better to be. He had dealt with brave captains before. Brave was easy. Brave people got their ship shot up and then cooperated, because bravery had its limits. This woman did not look brave. She looked like someone sitting through a meeting she had already planned for. 20 seconds. His sensor officer spoke. "Commander, I'm picking up a minor power fluctuation in their engineering section, Probably a coolant system cycling. Drawl nodded. Old ship, old systems. Everything about the Relentless Mercy matched the profile of a worn-out freight hauler, running a cargo it could barely afford to carry. The ore in the hold was worth taking. The ship itself was worth nothing. 10 seconds. He watched Voss. She glanced just once at something off-screen. Then she looked back at him. "Time's up," she said. And she cut the feed. The screen went blank. Drawl sat with the silence for exactly 2 seconds. Then he pointed at his weapons officer and said the word that ended the 60 seconds and started everything else. Fire. Across the bridge his crew moved with the smooth efficiency of people who had done this many times. Target locks confirmed. Weapons powered. Firing sequence initiated. No one on the Keth ship was afraid. They had no reason to be. They were 400 meters of warship, with a full weapons complement, and a battle record that went back 15 years. On the other side of their guns was a slow, old freighter, with 11 people aboard. But in the half-second before the first shot was fired, the sensor officer looked up from his screen. His voice was different than it had been before. Quieter, tighter. "Commander," he said, "I'm getting a new reading on that ship." Drawl turned. "What kind of reading?" The sensor officer looked at him. On his screen, the contact signature of the Relentless Mercy was changing. Drive output was rising. Not slowly, the way a freighter's engines would spool up. Fast. Very fast. The power curve was wrong for a cargo ship. It was wrong for any civilian vessel. "I don't know," the sensor officer said. "I've never seen this profile before." Drawl looked at the main view screen. In the dark, the shape of the Relentless Mercy was the same as it had been. Same worn hull. Same slow silhouette. But something was moving along its sides. Panels. Long, flat panels, flush with the hull, sliding back one by one, in a sequence that moved from bow to stern, like a zipper being undone. Beneath each panel was something that had not been there before. Hard angles, mechanical shapes, things that caught the light in a way that ore containers did not. Drawl had been in enough battles to recognize weapons when he saw them. "Evasive," he started. The Relentless Mercy fired first. 6 months before the Relentless Mercy drifted into the shattered belt, a man named Admiral Theo Guerin sat in a gray room on a station that did not appear on any public chart, and looked at a list of names. The names were ships, 31 of them, over the past 2 years. Freighters, cargo haulers, ore transports, all registered under the Terran Outer Freight Consortium, all traveling legitimate routes through space that had never officially been declared hostile. All gone. Some of them had managed to get a distress signal out before the end. Most had not. The Keth did not make announcements when they took a ship. They did not claim territory or issue warnings. They simply appeared, as they had appeared for 100 years in the outer systems, and they took what they wanted, and the ships that resisted became debris, and the ones that cooperated were stripped and left to limp home. The Terran Freight Consortium had filed complaints. The complaints had gone through diplomatic channels. The diplomatic channels had produced meetings, and the meetings had produced documents, and the documents had produced nothing. The Keth did not respond to paper. Guerin closed the file on the 31 ships and opened a different one. "The Keth," he said to the 2 officers sitting across from him, "understand one language. We are going to speak it." The plan had a formal designation that no one used. What everyone called it quietly among themselves was the Patience Program. It was not a new idea. Humans had done it before, in old wars on old oceans, on a planet that most people alive had never seen. They had taken ordinary-looking ships and filled them with things that were not ordinary. They had sent them out into the waters where the hunters hunted, and they had waited. The ship they chose was called the Relentless Mercy. It was a real ship. It had been a working freighter for 11 years before the Navy bought its registration and hull. They kept the same paint. They kept the same markings. They kept the same slow, unremarkable profile that any sensor sweep would read as a tired old hauler doing its route. What they changed was everything underneath. The hull plating was replaced, layer by layer, with military-grade composite armor. that was specifically designed to absorb the kind of energy weapons the Keth used most. The drives were swapped out for a military propulsion system that had 3 times the output of the civilian original, but could be throttled down to match civilian readings until the moment it wasn't. The communications arrays were rebuilt from the inside, with a full electronic warfare suite that could jam, spoof, and intercept signals across most standard military frequencies. And in the cargo holds, behind panels that looked exactly like standard ore container bulkheads, they put the weapons. There were 4 spinal-mounted railguns, 2 on each side, recessed into the hull and covered by plates that matched the exterior exactly. There were point defense clusters at 6 positions around the ship, built into what looked like sensor housings. There were torpedo launchers fore and aft, disguised as docking collar infrastructure. The whole system was wired into a fire control computer that had been designed for a ship twice the Relentless Mercy's size. The crew was 11 people. The manifest said they were freight workers. That was not accurate. Sarah Voss had 22 years in the Terran Navy, the last 9 of them in deep cover operations. She had commanded 3 ships before this one and had never once lost a crew member in action. She was not given to speeches or ceremonies. When Admiral Guerin offered her the Relentless Mercy and explained the mission, she had asked 2 questions: what the rules of engagement were and how long she had to prepare, and then she had said yes. Her navigator, a tall, quiet man named Orrin Hask, had spent 4 years as a siege tactician on the Outer Rim, before a broken shoulder had moved him to navigation. He could plot a firing solution inside an asteroid field at full speed without using the automated system. Her chief engineer, Doris Pack, had once rebuilt a jump drive in open space using only what was in the emergency kit and a personal cutter. She had then flown the ship home. She did not talk about it much. The gunner's name was Lev Caro. He was 29 years old and had more confirmed kills than most ship captains twice his age. He had a quiet manner and very steady hands, and he never seemed to get excited about anything, which was exactly the quality you wanted in someone whose job was to end other ships. The rest of the crew matched. Every one of them had been chosen not just for their skill, but for their specific kind of skill, the kind built up by years of doing hard things in bad situations and coming back from them. They were not heroes. They were professionals. There is a difference. They had spent 4 months running the Relentless Mercy on legitimate routes. They carried real cargo. They stopped at real stations. They filed real manifests. They did everything a civilian crew would do, because the whole point was that anyone watching them, and the Keth were always watching, would see exactly what they were supposed to see. They also ran drills, every day, quietly, timed exercises that they could do in the dark, that they had done so many times that the sequence was in their muscles rather than their minds. Drop the panels, spin up weapons, acquire targets, fire. The whole process, from civilian ship to combat-ready warship, took 41 seconds. Voss had pushed them until it took 38. She had also briefed them on the Keth. Not just the standard military briefings. She had read everything. Battle records, engagement logs, survivor accounts, even the diplomatic files that were technically above her clearance level. She wanted to understand how the Keth fought, but more than that, she wanted to understand how they thought. What she found was consistent. The Keth were confident to the edge of careless. They hit soft targets because soft targets were profitable and safe. They had a doctrine that said, board, strip, leave. Their commanders did not expect resistance, because resistance had never been worth it for anyone they'd encountered. They had fought bigger enemies and won, but those fights had been fleet actions, planned, prepared, anticipated. They had never been ambushed. Not once in the historical record she could find. They did not know what that felt like. The day the Relentless Mercy entered the shattered belt, Voss had gathered her crew in the main corridor for 60 seconds. She had not made a speech. She had looked at each of them in turn, and each of them had looked back at her, and that was the whole thing. Then she had gone back to the bridge, and they had gone to their stations. When the Keth cruiser appeared on sensors, Caro was already at his console. Hask had already updated his firing solutions. Pack had already unlocked the drive limiters. Every weapon on the ship was already cold-powered, meaning armed but not drawing current, invisible to a standard sensor sweep. They had been ready for weeks. Voss had listened to Drall's speech and had given him his 60 seconds, because that was what the rules of engagement required. A genuine opportunity to disengage. She had not expected him to take it. The Keth commander had the look of a man who had never had a reason to be careful, which meant he had never learned to read the room. The room, in this case, was a warship wearing a freighter's coat. And the 60 seconds were up. "Panels," said Voss. Caro hit the sequence. Along the sides of the Relentless Mercy, 34 hull plates slid back in a chain that took exactly 1.5 seconds from first to last. The weapons they'd been hiding saw light for the first time in months. "Drives," said Voss. Pack released the limiters. The drive signature of the Relentless Mercy tripled in under 2 seconds. On the Keth sensors, the contact they had been reading as a slow, dying freighter suddenly looked like something else entirely. "Targets locked," said Caro. His voice was the same as it always was, flat, professional. Voss looked at the main screen. The Keth ship was already beginning to react, drives coming up, a weapons charge building on the forward guns. Credit to them. They were fast. They were not fast enough. "Fire," said Voss. The first shot from the Relentless Mercy hit the Keth cruiser's forward gun array at a closing velocity that the Keth ship's armor had never been designed to handle. It did not destroy the array. It did not need to. It crumpled the housing, jammed the elevation mechanism, and sent 3 secondary explosions through the power conduits behind it in about 2 seconds. The forward guns were gone. The Keth cruiser had not yet finished its own firing sequence. On the bridge of the Keth ship, everything happened at once. The impact alarm, the damage report, the sensor officer screaming that the contact profile had changed and was still changing. Commander Drall grabbing the arm of his command chair as the ship shook from the hit. His weapons officer trying to redirect to secondary battery. His helmsman already pulling the ship into an evasive role that should have worked, that would have worked against almost anything. But the Relentless Mercy's fire control system had anticipated the roll, and the second shot was already in the air before the first one landed. The second shot hit the starboard engine housing. It was a solid hit, direct, and it knocked the Keth cruiser's drive output down by 1/3, and sent the ship into a slow spin that the helmsman spent the next 30 seconds fighting to correct. Voss watched this on the tactical display, and said nothing. At the back of the bridge, Lev Caro worked with the quiet focus of a man solving a problem he had solved many times before. His hands moved across the console without hurrying. He did not look at the clock. He did not look at the status of the Keth ship's shields. He just acquired, confirmed, and fired. Acquired, confirmed, fired. The Keth cruiser had 2 escort ships with it. Smaller patrol vessels, lightly armed, built for harassment and boarding, rather than a direct fight. They had been sitting back at 500 meters, waiting for the routine to play out, watching their flagship deal with the freighter. When the freighter turned out not to be a freighter, they hesitated for almost 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time in a battle. Caro used 2 of them to put a torpedo into the drive section of the first escort. The ship went dark and began to drift, unpowered, spinning slowly away from the engagement. He used the next second to shift to the second escort and put a railgun burst through its communications array. The escort was still alive, but it was deaf and blind, and moving very fast in a direction that was not toward the fight. Voss had told him, in the briefing before they entered the belt, "Disable the escorts. Don't destroy them if you don't need to. I want people who can talk afterward." Caro had nodded and gone back to his console. The flagship was still fighting. Its secondary battery had come online. two medium-range energy cannons on the port side that were now tracking the relentless Mercy with the kind of desperate accuracy that comes from a crew that has suddenly understood what they are dealing with. They scored 2 hits. The first one hit the relentless Mercy's port bow and burned a groove across the armor plating that would need repair, but did not break through. The second hit was better. It caught a section of the hull near the midship and knocked out one of the point defense clusters. Hull scoring, port side, Pack reported from engineering. Her voice was steady. Armor holding. PD Cluster 4 is offline. Everything else is green. Noted, said Voss. On the other side of the fight, the young Keth gunnery officer, whose name was Sarek, was doing the most frightening thing he had done in 3 years of service, trying to understand what he was looking at. He was 24 years old, and had been through the Keth Naval Academy and 2 combat deployments, and he had studied the military profiles of every species within 60 light-years of Keth space. He knew what humans flew. He had the specifications of their warships in a file on his console. Destroyers, frigates, carriers, he knew their drive signatures, their weapon outputs, their shield frequencies. What was outside his ship was not in his file. Its drive output was reading at the level of a light warship, but its hull configuration was not military standard. Its weapons were hitting harder than they should for something that size. Its armor was eating energy weapon hits that should have punched through a civilian hull 3 times over. And it was maneuvering like nothing with that mass had any right to maneuver, cutting angles that his own ship's helmsman would have called impossible. More than any of that, it was the pace that unnerved him. Human ships in the battle records he had studied, in the fleet engagements, in the convoy raids, they fought the way all species fought, with urgency, with visible effort, with the kind of energy that came from adrenaline and fear and the need to not die. Even good soldiers moved with something in their movements that you could call desperation. The crew of this ship did not move like that. They were fast, but there was no desperation in their speed. They were precise, but it was not the precision of fear. It was something quieter and older, the precision of people who had already decided how this would end, and were just working through the steps. That, more than the weapons or the armor or the drive output, made the cold run from Sarek's neck to his feet. Commander Drawl was still on his feet. He was a fighter. He had been hit before, and he had fought through it before, and he was not going to give up a ship to a freighter, whatever the freighter turned out to be. He was issuing orders fast, and his crew was responding, and his secondary battery was still online, and his shields, though reduced, were still up. Emergency power to shields, he said. All weapons on the forward aspect. Ramming course if necessary. They cannot stop us if we close distance. It was not a bad plan. It was in fact one of the better options available to him. If he could close the distance fast enough, the relentless Mercy's railguns would lose their advantage. They needed range. At close range it would come down to energy weapons and hull strength, and his hull was larger. Voss was watching the Keth flagship's drive output. She saw it spike. Hask, she said. He's coming in close. I see it, said Hask. His hands were already on the nav console. What followed was 20 seconds that Sarek would spend the rest of his life trying to explain to people who had not been there. The relentless Mercy did not run from the charge. It did not brace for impact. It turned, sharply, at a speed that his instruments said was not possible for a ship of that mass. And the turn brought it across the nose of the charging flagship, at an angle that put the Keth cruiser's bridge, the bridge, with Drawl and the command crew in it, directly in the path of the relentless Mercy's spinal rail line. Caro fired once. The round hit the Keth cruiser's bridge section at a shallow angle, punching through the outer hull, through 2 interior bulkheads, and out the other side, without detonating, because it was not a warhead. It was a solid kinetic penetrator. It left 2 holes, a lot of secondary damage, a lot of very frightened Keth officers, and Commander Drawl on the floor of his own bridge, with a pressure suit breach and a broken arm. Drawl was alive. Voss had calculated that he would be. She needed a witness. The drive output on the Keth flagship dropped to nothing. Cease fire, said Voss. Caro lifted his hands from the console. The relentless Mercy held its position 300 meters off the drifting flagship, and Voss looked at what was left of the engagement. One cruiser, dead in space, leaking atmosphere from 3 locations, with a command crew that was injured but alive. One escort drifting unpowered. One escort running at full burn in the opposite direction, deaf, blind, and very eager to be somewhere else. The whole fight had taken 4 minutes and 8 seconds. On the bridge, no one said anything. Not because there was nothing to feel, but because this was not the kind of crew that filled the silence after a fight with noise. Pack ran her damage report. Hask updated the nav plot. Caro ran a diagnostic on his console to check the weapons cycling. Voss looked at the dead flagship floating in the dark and thought for a moment. Then she turned to communications. "Get me the surviving command officer on that ship," she said. "Whoever's still able to talk." She had something to tell them. She had been thinking about what to say for months. The Keth officer who answered the hail was not Drawl. His name was Sub-Commander Yelt, and he was the ship's second officer, which made him the senior officer still capable of standing. He had a cut above his left eye that had been sealed with emergency foam, and he was holding himself with the careful stillness of someone whose ribs were not entirely intact. He looked at the screen when Voss appeared on it, and his expression was one that she had seen on people before, across many different species, in many different situations. He looked like a man trying to understand something that did not fit into any category he had. "I am Commander Sarah Voss," she said, "of the Terran vessel Relentless Mercy. I am hailing you because your ship is disabled, your crew is alive, and I have something to tell you." Yelt said nothing. He was watching her the way you watch something when you are not sure if it is going to move. "This engagement was recorded," Voss said, "every second of it. The sensor data, the communications intercepts, the full tactical picture. That record is going to be transmitted to Kef Dominion Naval Command within the hour. I am not transmitting it as a threat. I am transmitting it because your command structure needs to understand what happened here and why." She paused. Yelt still had not spoken. 6 months ago, Voss continued, the Terran government made a decision. They decided that diplomatic channels were not going to solve the problem of Keth interdiction of civilian freight. 31 ships in 2 years, crews lost, cargo taken, routes made unsafe. You know the numbers, your government generated them. Yelt's eyes moved, just slightly. "The decision was not to go to war," Voss said. "The Terran government does not want a war with the Keth Dominion. A war would cost both sides a great deal, and the outcome is not certain, and uncertainty is expensive. What the Terran government decided to do instead was simpler." She let the words sit for a moment. "They changed the math," she said. "Every civilian freight route that runs through space where Keth interdiction has occurred now carries one of these ships. Not a warship, not a visible deterrent, a ship that looks like a freighter, and is not. You will not be told which ships they are. Your patrols will not be able to identify them from sensor readings. The only way to find out which ships are carrying this kind of capability is to attack one." Yelt spoke for the first time. His voice was rough from the fight and something else. "How many?" he said. "That information is not available to me," Voss said. This was true. She had been told a number at her briefing, but the number had come with the instruction that it was not to be shared with any foreign national under any circumstances, and Voss followed her instructions. "I will tell you this," she said. "The program is not new. It has been running for 6 months. In that time, your patrols have attacked 2 Terran civilian vessels in interdiction actions. This is the second one." She watched Yelt process that. His expression did not change much, but the stillness in him shifted. She could see him thinking about the math she had just put in front of him. 2 attacks. This outcome. What did that mean for whatever had happened the first time? "I want to be clear about something," Voss said, and her voice stayed level, because the level voice was not a performance. It was simply the way she spoke when she meant what she was saying. "I am not a warship captain. My orders are not offensive. My ship and crew are here to protect Terran freight lanes. We fired because you fired first, and we did not destroy your ship because there was no need to destroy your ship. Your crew attacked a vessel they believed was unarmed. They found out it was not. That is the entire story." She leaned forward slightly. "What your command needs to understand, and this is the thing I want you to make sure they understand, is that this outcome was not personal. It was not punitive. It was not a military operation designed to send a message or demonstrate strength. It was a freight protection system responding to an interdiction action. That is all. The relentless mercy exists because your patrols kept taking our ships. The moment your patrols stop taking our ships, vessels like this one have no reason to engage." Yelt looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "What are your terms?" "We don't have terms," Voss said. "We have a preference. Stop hitting our ships." She could see him turning that over. He was an intelligent officer. She could tell. He understood the shape of what she was saying. The Terran government had not issued an ultimatum, had not drawn a line, had not made a declaration. They had simply made attacking Terran freighters into a problem with no predictable solution and a very bad possible outcome. And then they had said nothing about it publicly and let the outcome speak. "Your government will transmit this to the Senate," Yelt said. It was not quite a question. "The battle record will be transmitted to Keth Naval Command," Voss said. "What they do with it is their decision. I am not a diplomat." "And your ship," Yelt said. "You will stay here?" "I will stay until a rescue vessel reaches you. Your crew is not in immediate danger. Your life support is intact on the habitation decks. You have, by my estimate, 14 hours of comfortable air, and 6 hours beyond that on emergency reserve. A rescue vessel from the nearest Keth station can reach you in approximately 9 hours if you signal now." She paused. "I recommend you signal now." Yelt stared at her. Then slowly, he nodded. Voss closed the channel. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the bridge. Around her, her crew continued their work. Pack was running repairs on the PD cluster. Hask was updating the nav chart. Caro was doing his post-engagement diagnostic, line by line, methodical. "Damage report," Voss said. Pack answered without looking up. "Hull scoring on port bow cosmetic only. PD cluster 4 offline, repairable in about 2 hours. Minor stress fractures in frame section 7. Recommend inspection at next port. Everything else is nominal." "Casualties?" "None." Voss nodded. She looked out at the drifting Keth flagship and thought not for the first time that the hardest part of this kind of work was not the fight. The fight was simple. The hard part was afterward, when you sat with the weight of what you had done and what it meant, and you had to decide whether you felt anything about it that was worth feeling. She had disabled a Keth warship and its escorts. She had injured its crew. She had done it without losing a single person on her own ship. By every measure that a naval officer uses, it was a successful engagement. Clean and controlled. But she had also just sent a message that was going to change things. And she was enough of a realist to know that change had consequences that you could not always see from where you were standing. The Keth might pull back. They might escalate. They might do nothing for months, and then do something sudden and hard. She did not know. That was not her problem. Her problem was 43 meters of hull scoring, a broken point defense cluster, and a freight lane that needed watching. "Hask," she said, "what's our next waypoint?" "Breaker Station," he said, 11 hours at current speed. "Plot it," she said, "and after that Pack gets her 2 hours on the PD cluster." Pack made a small approving sound from engineering. The Relentless Mercy turned its bow toward the next point on its route, and its drives came up to the slow, unremarkable power output of a civilian hauler doing its rounds. Behind it, the Keth flagship floated in the dark and sent out a signal, quiet and urgent, asking to be found. Voss drank her coffee and watched the stars move. The battle record reached Keth Naval Command 14 hours after the fight ended. It was flagged as a priority transmission by the duty officer who received it, because the sender was a vessel that was registered as a civilian freighter, and the content of the transmission was a detailed tactical breakdown of a Keth warship being taken apart in 4 minutes. Fleet Admiral Goss received the file at her desk and watched the whole thing twice without stopping. Then she called her intelligence chief and her senior tactical officer, and she watched it a third time with them in the room. Nobody said much during the third viewing. When it was done, the intelligence chief, a careful, slow-speaking officer named Vath, who had been doing this job for 12 years, sat back in his chair and said, "We need to know how many of these ships there are." "We already tried," said the tactical officer. "We pulled everything in our intelligence database on Terran's civilian fleet movements for the last 8 months. We cannot identify any anomalous vessels. The ships are clean. The manifests are real. The crews have legitimate histories. Whatever they've done to hide these things, they've done it thoroughly." Goss looked at the frozen image on her screen. The relentless Mercy, panels open, weapons out, drive signature blazing, sitting 300 meters from the wreck of the Harrow's Pride. It had looked so ordinary 20 seconds before that frame. "What do our people on the diplomatic side say?" she asked. "The Terran government has made no statement," Vath said. "No press release, no diplomatic communication, no formal notification to the Dominion. They have not acknowledged the engagement publicly. As far as the official record is concerned, a Keth patrol vessel suffered a drive malfunction in the shattered belt and required rescue." "And the crew of the Harrow's Pride?" "Recovered. Commander Drahl is in medical with a broken arm and a pressure suit breach injury. Sub-Commander Yelt has given a debrief. The report is—" Vath paused in the way he paused when he was choosing his words carefully. "Consistent with the battle record." Goss pulled up the nav chart and looked at the web of Keth patrol corridors that ran through the outer systems, the ones that crossed Terran freight lanes, the ones that her patrol commanders had been using for a decade because they were convenient, and the freighters that moved through them had never been anything but convenient. She thought about the 31 ships that weren't on that chart anymore. 31 ships that had been taken without a fight, stripped, released or not released, cargo gone. 31 easy actions that had now produced this. She reached out and with 2 keystrokes rerouted every Keth patrol corridor that intersected a registered Terran freight lane. The rerouting added between 4 and 11 hours to the patrol cycles in the affected areas. It was inconvenient. It was also the first decision she had made in weeks that she felt entirely confident about. "Put out a quiet advisory," she told her tactical officer. "No formal notice. Just update the doctrine guidance for patrol engagements with unidentified civilian contacts in Terran-adjacent space. Additional verification required before interdiction. Treat all civilian contacts as potentially armed until confirmed otherwise." The tactical officer nodded and wrote it down. "And Vath," Goss said, "when you write your summary for the Senate Intelligence Committee, I want 1 line in the conclusion. 1 line. Write, the Terran response to freight interdiction was proportional, targeted, and did not constitute an act of war. It constituted a change in environment." Vath looked at her. "They'll ask what that means." "Good," said Goss. "Let them ask." 3 weeks later, in a different part of the galaxy, the Moretz Syndicate, a loose organization of independent operators who ran a profitable side business in cargo theft along the southern freight lanes, held a council meeting on the subject of human shipping. The meeting was prompted by a data package that had been anonymously forwarded to the syndicate's intelligence broker. The package contained the engagement record from the shattered belt, translated into 6 languages, with an attached analysis from someone who clearly knew what they were looking at. The analysis was 7 pages long, and the summary was 2 sentences. The summary said, "Terran civilian freight vessels may be armed warships in disguise. There is currently no reliable method of determining which ones." The council debated for 3 hours. The debate was mostly about money, because the Moretz Syndicate's debates were always mostly about money. Terran shipping was profitable. Terran shipping was also, apparently, now a problem where the probability of hitting a disguised warship was unknown, and the outcome if you hit one was a 4-minute engagement that ended with your ship in pieces. The vote to suspend all operations targeting Terran-flagged vessels passed 12-1. The single dissenting vote came from a council member who owned 2 ships and was convinced the risk was being overstated. He was outvoted. The council moved on. In an admiralty office on a station that orbited a planet called Vesh, a senior naval planner named Commander Iris spent an afternoon studying the engagement record that her intelligence service had quietly obtained and then quietly circulated. She had been working for the past 2 years on a strategic proposal that recommended a series of interdiction actions against Terran outer colonies as a way to pressure the Terran government on a territorial dispute that had been running since before she was born. She had nearly finished the proposal. She had been 2 weeks from submitting it. She spent the afternoon studying the engagement record instead. Then she opened the proposal and she read it from the beginning, and she thought about what the relentless mercy represented, and what it implied, and what the proposal would look like to a reader who had the same piece of intelligence she now had. She closed the proposal without making any changes. She put it in her desk drawer. She did not submit it. Weeks passed. The relentless mercy completed its route, docked at Breaker Station, offloaded its cargo, took on a new manifest, industrial components this time, destined for a colony on the far side of the belt, and departed on schedule. It was repainted during its time at station. The hull scoring from the fight was gone. The point defense cluster that Pak had repaired was back online. From the outside, in dock or in space, it looked exactly like what it had always looked like. A tired old freighter doing its rounds. Voss was on the bridge when the sensors picked up the contact. It appeared ahead and to port, coming in on an intercept heading that flattened out and became a parallel course at about 400 meters. Running lights. Registry signal. The markings were unfamiliar. A species Voss recognized from her briefings, but had never encountered directly. She watched the contact sit at 400 meters and hold its course. Parallel, not closing. Her communications officer said, "They're not hailing." "No," said Voss. The contact held for about 90 seconds. Then its drive output changed, a smooth, deliberate increase, and it pulled ahead and moved away on a course that had nothing to do with the relentless mercy's route. It had seen them. It had made a decision. It had left. Hask looked up from his nav console. "Changed course," he said. "They're gone." "I saw it," said Voss. She picked up her coffee. It was the same mug she always used, plain white, slightly chipped on the rim from the time it had slid off the console during a hard turn 2 years ago. She drank from it and looked at the space where the other ship had been. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say. What had just happened was not a story. It was not a victory. It was just a ship looking at another ship and making a calculation, and the calculation coming out the right way. And then the stars, going back to being just stars. At the weapons console, Caro was running his daily diagnostic. The tools of his trade cycled through their checks, ready and waiting for a job that today at least they did not need to do. The relentless mercy flew on, slow, old-looking, unremarkable. A freighter on a route, nothing to see, nothing to worry about.